We're fortunate our next speaker is someone many of you may know, though she's brand new to the role she's in. You may know her from a former role in the Florida Community College system as provost of the Wolfson campus at Miami-Dade College, as well as a number of leadership roles at Miami-Dade. She's now the chancellor of our 800,000 Florida Community College system, appointed this summer after having served as president and chief executive officer of Take Stock in Children. A major supporter, I've discovered already at Miami-Dade, of the Civics initiative and the great work that's going on there that we're all very well aware of. And she's already mentioned to me the continued support we'll get from her office, put you on the spot, continued support we'll get from her office for this initiative. As you know, the way St. Pete got involved, this was one of the things the legislature wanted us to do when they created our institute here. And with the transition in chancellors, the system actually asked us, would we take the lead again on this conference? And we were glad to do it, and now we're glad to have a chancellor in the role. So let me introduce Madeline Permiega. Ladies and gentlemen, please give her a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm especially happy to be here because I know I'm with the group of individuals who are really our champions on the ground every day. Earlier this week, we were having our equity conference, and I was saying that these are opportunities that I hope that it's not just learning from one another, but it's also refueling our souls. That we're with folks who understand the work that we're doing and the impact that it's making. And so oftentimes you're coming to these conferences and you're trying to balance. You have 100 emails, you have 17 other things that are going on. Many times you're away from home or the office, and it creates that much more of a challenge. But I also want you to pause and take in that you're among like-minded individuals. And when we're among folks that are thinking that way, it also gives us a chance to refuel our own soul. And in this work, if you're not refueling your soul, sometimes you wonder, what is it that we're doing? You're on your campuses, you're contributing, and you're also oftentimes explaining why we're doing what we're doing. And I know back almost 20 years ago at Miami-Dade College, when we were sitting around rooms strategizing with how would we involve service learning. And at the time we were talking about service learning, we were talking about civic engagement in a much broader form. And we knew one thing, and I think that all of you in this room know, that it's not an addition to, it's a value add. That when our faculty working together with our students see this as an opportunity of expanding a student's life experience, expanding that real life resume about how you take what's happening in the classroom, apply it in a community effort, and come back and reflect on what it means. I know for me, it shaped me. We weren't thinking civic engagement. We didn't have these institutes when I was a student at Miami-Dade College many years ago. But I was in an ISS 1120, and for those of you that have been here long enough know that that was the social environment, and my professor was Jackie Collier. And so Jackie said, if you need extra credit, you have to volunteer in a campaign. I always needed extra credit. Signed up to campaign on a Saturday morning, knocked door to door with Representative Art Simon. I can tell you that I majored in political science because of that Saturday morning. I was in love with what the process of democracy looked like. Often wondered when it went wrong, but I was enamored and loved that you knocked on the doors and you talked to people, and people spoke about the issues they cared about. And there I was as a student thinking, wow, this is how people are elected. I also licked a lot of envelopes, and he was reelected. And so I think about that, and I think about that as we look at a completion agenda, as our colleges are faced with extraordinary amount of pressures to ensure that students stay on track and complete, that we have, whether it's general education outcomes, whether it's SACS accreditation, all of the things that come to your desk or that new initiative. But I really believe that this is the path towards student completion and success. because it is around engagement. And it is about waking up a spirit in all of us to be better than who we are in this moment in time. And I think the work that all of you do, that our faculty and our students put together, is what really excels students into success. You can't talk about completion without talking about engagement. You can't talk about retention without talking about being inspired. And so I hope that you know that your work is very important to the Florida college system. It's incredibly important to your institutions, but never forget that it changes the lives of your students. And at the end of the day, we're in this work because of students. We're in this work because we believe we're change makers, because we believe that we can help students make those dreams become a reality, and we believe that we know how to grow people into civically and engaged, responsible individuals that will contribute to their families and to our communities. And you do that through having an informed and engaged student body. And so I want you to know, refill that cup, because the work that you're doing is really important. And sometimes I know that you are the unsung heroes that are just plowing along on your campuses to get this done. And so thank you for the lives that you've touched and will continue as we engage students in their responsibility and in their contributions back to their community, to themselves, to our great state, and especially to our amazing country. So thank you so much. I now have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker. And so she's really the expert in this area, and I think we'll learn from her in the next few minutes, as I had an opportunity to talk with her just a few minutes ago, but read from what's here, and you can see the rich diversity and the rich history that she brings around this and the expertise. And so again, as I said, this is a moment that we learn from each other. We go away hopefully recharged, but also with some action that we want to drive around. And so Nancy Thomas is a director of the Circle Initiative for Study of Higher Education and Public Life at Tufts University. Dr. Nancy Thomas directs the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education and the National Study of Learning, Voting, Engagement at Tufts University. Her work and her scholarship focuses on higher education's democratic mission, college student political engagement, free speech, academic freedom, and deliberative democracy on campuses and communities. And she's the author of multiple chapters. But I think more importantly, what we can contribute to her work is that I believe the Florida college system is Florida's democracy. Education is that equalizer of democracy, and our open access mission, the over 813,000 students we serve, the 110,000 that graduated last year, this is the work. This is the work and the path that continues to embrace our democracy and hold that strong as a pillar of our communities, our state, and our country. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Nancy Thomas.
Hi, y'all. Are you tired of me yet? Yeah. Let me at you for 10 minutes. So I think this has been a pretty amazing day so far. In fact, 24 hours. Lots of really great energy. And I think, as the Chancellor just suggested, recharging of batteries. That's really important. It is a tremendous honor for me to be here. I'm thrilled, not only because it's a little warmer than Boston, but because you all bring me energy. You are the ones that, when I come and spend time with you, I see all the good work that you're doing, and I think, my egghead existence as a researcher actually is relevant to what's going on the ground. And what you all are doing on the ground is so relevant to what I'm doing as a researcher. So I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much to Bill Clement, who invited me here, and Evelyn Schuett, who tolerated my plaintive cries for help. Where am I going? What am I doing? And also to Tara Newsom, who was just such an inspiration on the phone as we planned out what we were going to do on the panel this morning. She's contagious. So it's great. So for all the good work that we did over the last 24 hours and all the great ideas that have been exchanged, I'm now going to totally mess it up. I'm going to mess with your heads. I want you to think about these questions. I bet you've already read them. What are the aims of academic freedom? What are the aims of college education? And what are the aims of civic learning and engagement? So hold those questions because I'm going to come back to them throughout this talk. But right now, does this work? Doesn't want to go for me. Tell me there's an on button. Okay, so this is my thesis. I don't think that we can do what we do unless we're political. And I don't think that we're very political. And therefore, I don't think we're doing what we can do. I think higher education has tremendous barriers in this work. I think the work that you do is up against some pretty stunning forces. And I want to talk about those forces and kind of give you a little bit of a warning, because I do think that we're in for some political turbulence ahead. So let me start with academic freedom, and I'm just kind of curious. What do you think of when you think of academic freedom? Let me put it a different way. Academic freedom for what? What are the aims of academic freedom? And I use the word aims very intentionally because I'm thinking of a target. I'm thinking of that point on the horizon toward which we are steering the ship. So just shout out a couple of things about what are the aims of academic freedom. Why do we have academic freedom as academics? To facilitate critical thinking? To pursue research in any area? Pluralism. Say more. Great. More? Just a couple more? Oh, there and then there. Say it again. The freedom to create change makers.
And the opportunity to present points of view that are out of the ordinary for that population.
Okay, you all have been talking about academic freedom. This is great. I will tell you that I was giving a talk once at a major research university, and it was about educating for democracy, and this hand went up in the back of the room, and the guy stands up and he says, "What does this have to do with the search for truth?" Which is, in a lot of circles, the definition of academic freedom. It is the search for truth. It is also being used to describe the role of faculty. I can do what I want, I can teach when I want, I can cover what I want, and I can do it my own way. And so I want to come back to that what you all just said, which I think is closer to my vision for academic freedom than it is in other campuses that I've visited. I want to tell you a story that happened to me just this week. I got a call from a woman I do not know. She said that she was an administrator at a large university in the South, that she had just finished a year of doing some research at Harvard and was heading back south, but that she was a little bit worried. And she said, "Nancy, what are you going to do about legislative interference with the way we do our work?" She said, legislators are defunding our centers, our women's centers, our poverty centers. We are facing pressures to terminate faculty members because of their viewpoints. And I was reminded of all the things that my office is tracking, which are dozens of these stories around the country, dozens of them. The faculty member who was teaching a course and one of the assignments had to do with some government papers, and when the government shut down, the students couldn't do the assignment, so she sent out an email and it said, I guess we'll have to change the syllabus because we have to wait until the Republicans decide to govern again. Probably not the most articulate way to put it, but she lost her job. And there are efforts to defund all sorts of things. There's no wiggle room these days on these issues. People are trying to control what books our students can read. What's the common book? How many times do I hear this? The ALA, the American Libraries Association, they actually have lists of censored books. And these are annual. These are annual. And there are some political groups that are rapid response teams. Absolutely rapid response teams. You go into your classroom, you say something, you realize it's been tape recorded, it's on somebody's phone, all of a sudden it goes viral. This actually happened to me once. I was quite proud. And, and I got on a list. I got on a list for the National Review for one very proud day of being one of the 100 most dangerous academics in the country. Yeah, I didn't stay there when they dug in deeply and found out what the truth was. Oh gosh, she actually is deliberative. She talks about all sides. So in that vein, this is not just coming from the right. This is not just coming from people who want government to be smaller. This is coming from students. Our students are challenging how we talk on campus. Hecklers are shutting down speakers. And at one university, the University of Minnesota, the administration received a petition saying that there was a flyer advertising an event after Charlie Hebdo was murdered in Paris, a shutdown of free speech, if ever there was one. And a bunch of students said that the flyer advertising this violated their deeply held religious affiliations. Can't even have the conversation. At the University of Washington, very recently, graduate students have negotiated a new contract that includes a clause that their work environments should be, quote, free from everyday exchanges that denigrate or exclude them as members of some group. I totally get this, actually. I totally get it. I practiced law in the 80s, and when I got to the ed school and found all these women as classmates, it was such a relief. I had practiced with, in a firm, about 18 people, 18 partners. 17 of the partners had wives that stayed at home, and one had a wife who worked. They were all men. My whole cohort was men. When I hit the 5th year of practicing law, they called me in and they said, Nancy, we think you're great. You know, your clients love you, your research is good, your writing is good, you're good in court, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to pay you $500 less than the guys in your cohort because we don't feel like we know you. We don't get you. So we're gonna, as an incentive for you to help us get you, we're going to pay you $500 less. So I completely get the frustration on college campuses about the way pluralism is being managed. I also think that our system is structurally flawed, that we have a 2-tiered system where 80% of white students go to 450 specific institutions in this country, and 70-some% of African Americans go to different kinds of campuses. And the system perpetuates itself. There is so much inequality as a result of the big system of higher education. So I completely understand the frustration that is going on among students who are in groups that feel exhausted. I just don't think that the solution is to shut down speech. I think the solution is actually more speech. So, let me ask you a new question. We talked about Wisconsin. What are the aims of a college education? Reparations and completion, so an equity agenda, an equality agenda. Mm-hmm.
Be a good citizen.
Be a good citizen.
Self-fulfillment.
And self-fulfillment. One and the same, two different things?
Related.
Related. Okay. So some kind of well-being. Yeah.
Educated citizenry, educated, economic, and social citizenry.
Right.
Governor said it was for job preparation.
Job preparation.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
But develop skills.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a pretty common, and I think it's an accurate list. It's for knowledge and skills for well-being and what some people are now calling flourishing, which I like, because you can say it with flourish. Workforce preparation, equal opportunity, and then to advance the values and create engaged citizens. I think that's a pretty good aim of education broadly. So what are the aims of civic education? Social justice, empowerment.
An educated citizen, active, engaged, educated citizen.
Active and engaged, educated citizenry. Okay, good.
To encourage and engage people to become leaders.
Right. Leaders. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know how to articulate this, Nancy, but to have the diversity of the citizenry play out in society. I don't know how to put that in the word in a way that would make a definition, but so that civic learning would reach people wherever they are, wherever skill set they have, can contribute to society.
Right. Okay. Making a contribution to society.
And in the end, it's just to make life better, to make life more fulfilling, but make our connections with each other richer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To go back to the skill part, I think civic learning helps us figure out what skills society needs.
Right. Right.
I would have to say awareness. A lot of our students aren't aware of the engagement of civic learning, even at the community college level. They're local government. So I would say awareness.
Awareness. Yeah. This is good. This is good. I'm trying to keep you all awake. It's the lunchtime hour, you know. If I engage you, you won't fall asleep on me.
Very specific to me, and I think a very important component of all that engagement is understanding political institutions and how to maximize their effectiveness in being engaged in those institutions.
Right.
Very important.
Great, great. Okay, so I'm going to move on to I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about three things in this talk. One was academic freedom, two is civic learning and engagement, and three is the state of American democracy. And then I'm going to tie them all back together. So I want to turn to the state of American democracy. So these are just some graphs that are very probably familiar in one form or another. We have a terrible, terrible crisis in wealth and racial inequality. It's, by some accounts, the worst as it's been in 100 years, or at least wealth inequality is. We heard some talk earlier about the civic health indicators, which are that was a list that was given this morning. Things like, are you talking to your neighbors? Are you helping them out? Are you voting? Are you donating money? Those are the civic health indicators. And they're down. They've been going down. They've been going down for 35 years. They went up for a little bit, and now maybe they're going down again. I think we have to keep track of that. And Circle, my corollary organization at Tufts, is the one that does all the data for that. We also have a real crisis with college students. Our college students are disengaged. They are politically disengaged. John Della Volpe, whose mug is up there, he would probably be mad at me if I used that picture, but I did. They do a freshman survey at Harvard, not a freshman survey, they call it their annual student and non-student survey of political engagement. And their numbers are literally awful. 60 to 70% of the respondents say that they engage in some kind of service. Under 10% say that they engage in a political issue or organization over the past year. I think we're doing a phenomenal job in higher education, getting students into communities, getting them to serve, getting them to work in communities, even toward real local change. I don't think we're doing what we need to do to get them to fix the problems of democracy. And that's a whole different agenda that I think actually the civic engagement movement broadly has dodged. I think you all are better, and that's why your voting rates are higher. I mean, you're better. But if we go nationwide, it's a pretty bleak statement. And I think campuses are they're just not ready because it's hard to educate for democracy because it's political. It gets ugly. It's scary. It's much harder to do than sending your students in to do a tidy service experience in a community. So I'm going to deviate for 1 sec. These are really fun, and that's why I'm doing this, because this is fun. It's scary, though. So hang on. I find this scary anyway. So Diana Hess, who is the Dean of Education at the School of Wisconsin, she has a new book out called The Political Classroom. And these are her slides. I rated from her. So this was the state of political compromise in the 1950s. And of course, the red and the blue, the red are the conservatives, and the blue are more liberal, Democrats and Republicans. And you can see that they're separated, but there's some overlap. This is tracked. I didn't know she had all these little things in them. Okay, keep going. There. This is 1960. You can see some differences. 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. This is the state of our democracy and our ability to find compromise, to talk with each other. Pew does amazing research on this. I mean, absolutely amazing. And it is stunning what people now say about their own affiliations. This is not limited to our elected officials. This is our country. We are deeply divided as a nation. And it's rural, it's urban, it's east, it's west, it's north, it's south. But we're really polarized. One of the Pew polls showed that 92% of all Republicans who are to the right of the median Democrat, okay, so just right of the median Democrat, and 94% of the Democrats who are to the left of the median Republican answer the question, yes, and the question is, do you believe that the opposing party's policies are so misguided that they threaten the nation's well-being? Yes. This is beyond, I don't agree with your policies. This is, I don't like you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't like you. I'm not going to compromise with you. And, oh, by the way, talk to the hand. There's a lot of studies, many. Drew Weston has done these amazing studies about how people's brains literally do not light up when somebody from the opposite party talks to them. And it's both directions. It's not all one. Even our Supreme Court is divided along partisan lines. I'm sorry. I'm a lawyer. That is bad. So our democracy isn't doing very well. I mean, there are other things that I could tell you about. I've certainly covered wealth and some of the disparities. We've talked a little bit today about who votes and how that matters. That's a really important problem because 80% of wealthy people vote and 50% of poor people vote. And politicians simply do not listen to non-voters. They don't need to. So if you're poor and you don't vote, they're not going to hear you. And if you're rich and you do vote, you know they're going to hear you. Okay, so I want to go back to the question, civic education for what? And I want to plant in your minds maybe a slightly different answer, and that is for the democracy we want, not for the democracy we have. That the aims of civic learning are to give students the skills, the knowledge, and the commitments they need to co-create the democracy we want. So one of the big writers on this, his name is David Matthews. He's at the Kettering Foundation. He's the president. And he distinguishes between problems in democracy and problems of democracy. And I think this is a nifty distinction to make and use. We all send our students into communities to work on the problems in democracy. You know, they go into soup kitchens to work on homelessness and scarce food. They go into other, they work on water rights so that there can be equal access to water. These are the problems in democracy. And they're very significant, and I do not disparage anybody who's doing this. It's absolutely critical work, and it is the foundation of our civil society. If we weren't doing this work, if we didn't have volunteers and people in communities doing this work, we would fall apart. But I'd like to suggest that maybe there is a template for educating students. And I call this democracy by design. So I identified the problems of democracy as partisanship, rampant inequality. I didn't mention, and should have, the lack of access to good information and the absolute crazy amount of information that's out there and how difficult it is for people, particularly young people, to sort through it. And then government structures. I mean, we know that we've got problems with how people vote. We know there's uneven. That was really Freudian. We know that we've got problems with this. So what I would like to propose, and this is something that I put together, but it's based on 10 years of work with civic organizations who are on the front line of doing democracy building work. So the Kettering Foundation, Everyday Democracy, Public Conversations Project, a lot of different organizations that are working just on the problems of democracy. And this is sort of the agenda that we kicked around, and then I reduced it to paper and sent it around and said, do you hate it? And they didn't say they hated it. So I think that no student should graduate from college without knowing the 4 top columns. I think every single student should know that these are the foundations of democracy, that we need to have active and deliberative public participation, that we need to have freedom, justice, and equal opportunity, that we need to have good information and great schools so that people can sort through information, and that we need effective government structures. So I think everybody should know this, and I would call it the sort of the something about everything. And then I think that students should graduate knowing everything about something. And those would be the columns underneath. And what I'm hoping campuses will do is pick this up and pick it apart and say, no, we want something else in our blue boxes. We want to do it our way. We want to make it our own. This is a discussion guide. It's not a mandate. But the idea is every student then would have some deep dive into one of the blue boxes. And they would understand then how these things connect with each other. And so I would like to propose that as a way to sort through some of the challenges. So what does this have to do with academic freedom? I don't think we know how to answer the question, education for what, or civic education for what, very well. And as a result, we get into these little skirmishes that paralyze the institutions, and as a result, they don't want to even go there. If we were able to say, we educate to address the problems of democracy, I don't know how that can be a partisan issue. It's a nonpartisan agenda. The partisan part is, how do you implement equal opportunity? How do you preserve good decision-making by the Supreme Court or other court systems? The devil is in the details, but the agenda itself is nonpartisan. And so when you get faced with challenges, you're not doing your job. Stick with your pursuit of truth or your career development. You can say, no, our job is to ask the inconvenient questions about how our democracy is working and how we can improve it. And that's what we're doing here. So when the faculty member said, the Republicans are shutting down our government, the right response was not to fire that faculty member. The right response was to talk about it. Is it really was it really caused by the Republicans? Was it caused by something else? Where was the disconnect? How did this happen? Since when does our government shut down because people don't get their way? Well, maybe it shuts down when they don't get their way because they don't get their way. You know, it's very nuanced. So I think that in the end, if we can answer the question, what this person was doing, what I was saying, how I was acting, the experience of my student, all of those things are related to an agenda of teaching to address the problems of democracy, we aren't going to hit the political turbulence that we're in right now. And on that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions. And you can ask me the inconvenient questions.
Well, I think we all somehow along the line teach about the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill that were obviously from different parties, philosophical bents, and would have it out during the day, but in the evenings, Tip O'Neill would go over to the White House while they would have cocktails and talk about how can we fix this.
Right.
Has that stopped after Ronald Reagan?
I don't know. I'm not sure I can answer the question, has it stopped? But I do think it was in an era when there was so much homogeneity among our elected officials that it was easier. You think that the guys in my law firm didn't like each other? They went out every single night drinking and playing this dice game, and I didn't go. So is it my job to then go play the dice game so that they'll hear my ideas? I think the problem is that the monopoly board was set up by a certain group of people, and they own the property, they own the systems, they own the structures, and new people are coming in, and this applies in both directions. You know, you could make this case for different social identity groups, and you could also make it for the Tea Party, but they're coming in and they're saying, the board is structured wrong, and we're not going to play. And then you get into this I'm taking my bat and going home thing at 5 o'clock. They don't want to work together because it's much harder, I think, than it used to be. Our nation is sorting, and our students, there's a huge statistics on our students coming to school with very homogeneous experiences from home. They live in communities where people share their identity or ideology.
Well, let me just say to your point about being a lawyer. I'm blessed to have a wife that's a lawyer in the oldest law firm in town.
Yay.
And she was getting ready to go to a meeting the next day, and she got a phone call from a guy saying, "You're up against the big boys now. You know that, don't you?" And she says, "This guy you're going up against tomorrow is a Harvard Law grad."
Yeah.
And, you know, she was stressed, but she proceeded to kick his ass the next day.
There you go.
And now her partners look at her differently.
Right.
She's earned the right to sit at the table and have a drink with him or whatever, you
Right.
know, and now she's a senior partner and she controls the compensation committee, which
Right.
is kind of a nice thing to do, but you had to work through that. But I want to go back to something
Yeah.
else. Is I find that my students that are international students are scoring the highest on my American government tests because they had to learn it in order to get citizenship.
Right.
The rest of us were lucky enough to be born here, and I guess somebody assumed that it just osmosed to us over those years. And I find that very difficult. And I love, after my first class, when I give them 20 questions from the citizenship test just to find out what they know about government.
Mm-hmm.
Because my students that are dual enrolled high school kids get their paper and immediately turn it upside down so no one can see their score. And so it's hard to work with them. My class goes from 16 to mid-50s. It's difficult, and you know, so you've got kids that are clueless, and then you got the 50-year-olds that never got the chance or took advantage of the opportunity to learn. So it's very difficult, especially when you see these charts of how it's broken out now today. I don't know what the answer is. I'm old school, obviously. I'm a face-to-face guy, not a online guy. So I don't have an answer for you, except I'm still wondering what happened to Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan.
Hi, this might be just a little too much sort of process-oriented as far as classwork is concerned, but something that I think our students have a difficult time understanding is that the system that we have now, branches of government, the Constitution, the committee system, all this sort of stuff, is a system of a completely different age, right? The 18th century is not 21st century America.
Right.
And I know a lot of, I get this question all the time. It seems as though Congress just doesn't work, right? And I tell them that's partially the idea of the founders, is that you can't have change happen rapidly. And so ideas from the 18th century about how government should work, because Hamilton and Madison don't really think that the general population should be voting, right? Nowadays, that's what we're pushing for. So how, when you're in a class, I mean, you talk about, well, of course, things have changed over time, so on and so forth, but for students, I think they find it kind of disturbing that in the 18th century, the system was based not on inclusion, but was expressly exclusive. And not just of women and minorities, but of poor white people or poor white guys in Virginia.
Right.
You know, and how do you deal with that? I mean, how much context do we put all this in?
Yeah. It's such a good question, and it's such a hard one, because there's so much nostalgia for our founding fathers. And there's an assumption of wisdom until you start digging into their lives and how many slaves they owned and whether they freed them when they died. And these are the ethical dilemmas of teaching about democracy. So I would teach them as the ethical dilemmas. I would say that so my daughter sent me a cartoon, so not funny, but funny in a way, of a guy going into a classroom with a musket and saying, "Don't anybody move," and he's packing the powder, you know, because he wants to do a mass shooting, but he has the gun that was there at the time that the Second Amendment was passed. So, you know, we have to address democracy as it is, not as it was. And we have to continually try to be more inclusive. Our fights for civil rights, they just are never ending. They're not where they should be, and they are never ending, but they are continuous. I think we're in a little glitch right now. I'm really pushing to make sure it keeps going in the direction that I think it did go for a while. So I would teach it as, I would literally lay it on the line, you know, and say, look, this is what the context was then. Here's what we have now. I heard a woman talking, she runs the Center for Ethics at Harvard. She gave a little talk at Tufts last week. And she was talking about how we can rely on the Declaration of Independence for language over the Constitution. And she had done some writing and found old letters talking about the role of the Declaration of Independence and how it had influenced some of the framers. And that's the Declaration of Independence is a much stronger document for the case of equality, although not for women. All men are created equal, but it still makes the case that equality is an inalienable right. And so ask, here are the two documents. What are we going to do about this? How do we reconcile them? Teach the tensions, teach the conflict. And I think that's the best you can do, other than teaching them then how to change things as they are right now. Other questions?
Hi, Dr. Thomas. I'm actually a student here at SPC, so this has been a great couple of days for me, just understanding what my professors and people actually go through on a daily basis. My question really is, you talked about nonpartisan and how that really plays into it. I think a lot of the issues the millennials I know I have is this idea of this extreme two-party system, and I don't necessarily get the education or feel the education is out there for a nonpartisan system where we're backing away from this, you know, hardcore Republican, hardcore Democrat. So how do professors and people kind of implement that to where we're having educated people who know about other parties and not just necessarily the Republican and Democrat, which is usually what's taught?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question, and really what I want to do is turn it back on you and say, so what do you think of this? Can we do that? So neutrality is an enormous issue, if you think about it, because faculty, I think, over the last, pretty much since the 60s, it absolutely shifted from, too much action, too much activism, big fear about things. People were dying in the 60s being activists. I mean, Andrew Goodman went down to Mississippi to register voters, and he was killed. He was a student at the time. So violence and really ferocious activism, I think, catapulted the academy into the other direction. And we ended up with some kind of weird values-free education. And so neutrality is just such an important buzzword, and everybody's told to be neutral. I don't buy it. First of all, I don't think any of us are. Second of all, I don't think we can authentically pretend that we are. But I do think we can take perspectives. And I think it is our responsibility as educators to make sure that students do perspective taking, that they sit down and they write out all of the perspectives on an issue, and they think through and they talk to each other and they weigh the pros and cons. It's when you get a faculty member who doesn't push for all of the perspectives to be considered that I think you run into trouble. I, as a faculty member, I may feel very strongly in one direction, but it's my obligation to make sure that even I have thought about the different perspectives. So I actually think perspective taking is one of the critical skills that students should graduate with. That and the ability to engage in dialogue, deliberation, conflict management, intergroup dialogue particularly. Those are the skills, but perspective taking. Does that answer your question? You would like more perspective taking. Everybody hear that? Student would like more perspective taking. I would too. I would too. So, one of the things that I'm probably jumping over here, and I shouldn't, is this is hard. Okay, this is really hard. I started on this work in 1999, where I started working with an organization called Everyday Democracy. But I also got a little mini grant. This was like the best thing that ever happened to me, to take all of these different dialogue approaches to various campuses and test them. So I went to Florida State, actually, and we worked on the credo using a big, huge dialogue process. And it was in learning all of these ways to do it that I realized how damn hard it is to do. And doing dialogue, as Daniel Yankelovich will happily say, it doesn't come naturally. What comes naturally is for us to argue. Doing dialogue is not in our, it's just not the way it's just not intuitive. So I think it has to be taught, and all of the component parts to a good dialogue have to be taught. That doesn't mean that I'm opposed to advocacy or activism. I'm all in favor of it. In fact, I said this morning, campuses need to be nimble because we want the activism. We want those student protesters back. We just need to know what to do. There was another question.
Going back to the earlier point about this nonpartisan thinking, and that's a scary thing when you see that slide up there with the Republicans and the Democrats so far apart.
It's really scary.
Especially in my major, public policy administration. But I would like to just say one thing about that program is that it is ingrained in us, in our bachelor's program, to put on the other hat, to take off your own hat and to look at all the stakeholders, all of their perspectives, and to take your own opinion out of it.
Right.
And the one thing that is repeatedly taught to us over and over and over is Miles' law. Where you stand depends on where you sit. So until you take the moment to sit somewhere else, you can't see the other perspective. And I'd like to encourage all of you that are professors here to carry that in all of your classes, because discussion on positions or different perspectives is not limited to an American government or political science course. Right. It's there in your ethics course, it's there in your psychology courses, it's there in your biology and all your science and mathematics courses. As long as we can look at that other perspective and how someone else sees it, we then can be more effective in dealing and engaging civically with other people.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I would take it one step further and argue that we all need to get a handle on our privileges. We all have privilege, and students who are in college have privilege. Non-college youth have it way worse. Students who are in college, even if they're first gen, they have a privilege. I have huge privileges just because of both my parents went to college, and where I grew up was a certain kind of community. And those privileges shape my everything. And I needed to learn to not just check my privilege, but to ask others to check it for me or with me. And I will regularly say to my staff, have we put an equity lens to this document? Have we put an equity lens to this interview guide for this qualitative research? Have we applied an equity lens to our focus group questions? We're putting out a guide for non-statutory barriers to voting. Have we put an equity lens to it? And I don't rely on myself to do that. I have diversity on my team, all sorts of diversity, so that any kind of privilege that is within the team is checked by people with other perspectives. It's a form of perspective taking, but it's the hardest one to do.
We have time for one more question. Looks like you've done your job.
Ah, I wore them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Oh, thank you.
I'd
Do you
like
need
to
a slide?
I'd like to take a minute of personal privilege and ask one of our deans and faculty members to do a little benediction before David gives the final remarks. And I'm thinking of benediction in terms of your reaction, Joe, as somebody who started a lot of this activity through the last 2 days.
First of all, it's always a pleasure to be among academics. It's a pleasure to be among students. And it's enormously a pleasure to be in an environment where they're both together, engaging in clear, critical examination of issues that are in fact before us. We're certainly all mindful and careful about the importance of working with our students. We're all careful and mindful of the importance of this civic engagement issue. Sometimes I think we complicate things. Okay, it's not a complicated thing to do that which is good and pleasing as you work not only to help others that are all around you, but to help them in such a way that they can go on and help others. And we're certainly in a tremendous place to do that. I just want to express my appreciation for the entire event. I do believe it's a very important event. It's critical. I just happen to believe that the community college perhaps is the most powerful, it is indeed the most, in my mind, effective institution for achieving the kinds of things that we're talking about. Much of what was shared on the screen a few moments ago, that the community college is in a powerful position to do that. It's typically an institution where you have variety all over the place. It's typically an institution where you can walk in and you can find the economic spectrum from A to Z. You'll find the one from the lowest income level, you'll find ones from the highest income level, and they're in between. So it's a wonderful institution for causing it to happen. So I'm encouraging, in this particular case, those who are, especially those who are administrators, deans, program administrators, presidents, those three individuals can make a powerful impact on causing this to happen. Which means that, and I hope I can say this, clearly here at St. Petersburg College, our president has made that priority one. It's real clear. It's priority one with him. And any dean in their right mind would know that that should mean that it should be priority one with you equally as well. And it just so happens it's priority one with me, not so much because of that, because I think it's the right thing to do. And so I would just encourage that we create an environment, in this case, Archie, I know you're a wonderful institution, bless you for that. We create an environment where this kind of thing will permeate all of our classes. That is to say, every classroom that you walk into ought to ignite something in you about this civic obligation and commitment to do that which is good and pleasing. And so I'm very, very pleased, Dr. Furlong, with the environment that you work to create here. Environment and culture is vitally important, that we encourage each other. So all the academics in the room, faculty members, administrators in this case, let's move forward away from this particular meeting and create a snowballing effect. What we call the civic movement is what we're calling it around here, that for the entire state of Florida become a compelling civic movement with the support of all of our community colleges. And just the record, don't forget, we are community colleges. You can change your name all you want. You can call yourself this state, that state type institution. That doesn't change the fact that you are a community college representing those communities that are around you. And so this civic engagement thing is powerfully important, Dr. Furlong, and I know we're pushing it here and going to be encouraging all of us to do that. I see a great movement, and you all may want to study this, watch this thing very carefully. I see a great movement occurring with the community colleges in the state of Florida, taking and carrying forward the civic movement in a powerful, powerful way. So I wish you all well. Let's talk. Let's share ideas about what's working. There's some great things working here, but we've been in conversation. I know I've been in conversation with Miami-Dade and engaging discussions with the things that you all have down there, and we're sharing, and that's a good way for us to move forward. So we're grateful for what has taken place at this great meeting, and thank you for it.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Smiley. You have eloquently more or less summed up what I was going to say in closing remarks. But before I do let you go, I do want to recognize some of the people who have made this conference possible. First, my staff, Jacqueline Shuett, Shante Williams, and Lakin Hamby. our technology staff, some of whom are not here but have been here most of the days, Jonathan Sullivan, Raphael Witten, and Paul Sullivan, and a number of student volunteers, more than I have names for. But I also want to recognize the advisory committee, informal advisory committee of St. Petersburg College, who helped put this agenda together. First, Dr. Furlong, of course, Dr. Susan Demers, whom you heard speak, Dr. Joe Smiley, whom you just heard, Professor Earl Freitas, and Professor Tara Newsom, and Professor Jeff Kronschnabel, who could not be here. Thank all of you for your ideas and support to make this conference what it has been. And I hope it has been to you what it has been to me. As Nancy said, or one of the speakers said, it's invigorating to be immersed in a discussion like this for almost 26 hours now. I mean, yeah, it's 26 hours. It charges the batteries to keep on doing what can sometimes be quite discouraging work, facing the apathy around us and sometimes hostility. But we know we have to keep up the work because, after all, ask yourself, if not us, who? If not now, when? So thank you. Have a safe journey home. One other thing, if you would, go to the Civic, the website that we have dedicated to this project for best practices. It is civicseducation.spcollege.edu. Look at what is there and add your best practices. We will be putting the best practices we got yesterday evening on there in the next few days, and video of this entire conference will be up there in a few days as soon as we get it edited. Thank you. The conference is adjourned. Safe trip home.